The millionaire had always carried himself with the kind of confidence that only old money and long-standing privilege could create. His suits were tailored, his shoes polished to a mirror shine, and his laughter, the deep, booming kind, often echoed through the marble halls of the bank he practically lived in. He liked being recognized, admired, and, when possible, feared. People rarely questioned him. They rarely had reason to. So when the young woman stepped into the private banking lounge, he barely looked up from his newspaper. She seemed ordinary enough at first glance. Simple clothes, soft voice, the kind of presence that didn't demand attention. She waited politely, standing a few steps behind him as he finished skimming an article bragging about his recent business success. Finally, she cleared her throat. "Excuse me," she said gently. "I just want to check my balance." The millionaire glanced at her for the first time, and the faintest hint of amusement curled across his lips. Her humility, her quietness, he read it instantly as financial simplicity. Perhaps even struggle. He had seen it before. People coming to check their last few dollars, worried about overdue payments or shrinking accounts. He chuckled, not unkindly but dismissively, as though her request were nothing more than a harmless interruption to his afternoon. "Of course you do," he said with a knowing smirk. "Go ahead." The woman nodded, stepping toward the kiosk. She moved with a calm confidence he didn't expect, not timid, not embarrassed, simply composed. She tapped her card, entered her code, and waited as the machine processed her information. The millionaire leaned back in his chair, still wearing that half-mocking smile. He remembered the days when he used to monitor every penny, long before he had made it big. Maybe she reminded him of his younger self, but in a way he thought was almost nostalgic, someone who had nothing yet hoped for more. But something about her remained puzzling. She didn't carry the nervousness he associated with financial struggle. There was no hesitation in her movements, no anxious shifting of weight, no darting eyes scanning the room for judgment. She stood tall, patient, almost serene. The machine beeped. The screen lit up. And in that instant, everything changed. The millionaire's smirk froze. He watched her balance appear in glowing, unmistakable digits, digits that dwarfed anything he had been imagining. Not hundreds, not thousands, not even the modest savings of a responsible young adult. The number gleamed with a string of zeros long enough to make even his experienced eyes widen. Millions. More than he had at her age. Possibly more than he had now. His breath caught. He straightened in his chair. Suddenly, she no longer seemed ordinary. Suddenly, his assumptions felt embarrassingly small. The young woman glanced over her shoulder, noticing the stunned expression spreading across his face. "Is everything okay?" she asked politely, as though nothing unusual had happened. He swallowed. I didn't expect." He stopped himself, realizing how foolish he sounded. His earlier laughter echoed in his ears, hollow and arrogant. She seemed almost amused, though she remained perfectly respectful. "People underestimate me a lot," she said softly. "It doesn't bother me." He wasn't sure if she meant it kindly or if it was a gentle correction. Either way, it struck deeper than he expected. For the first time in years, the millionaire felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: humility. He had built his life on assumptions, on judgments made in seconds, on the belief that wealth had a certain look, or style. But standing before him was someone who didn't fit those expectations at all, someone who carried immense wealth without flaunting it, someone who moved quietly through the world with strength that didn't need to be announced. "You're quite successful," he finally said, his tone more respectful than before. She smiled. "I work hard. I prefer to keep a low profile." He nodded slowly, feeling the weight of his earlier arrogance settle onto his shoulders. "I misjudged you," he admitted, the words catching slightly in his throat. "It happens," she replied simply. "Everyone's story is different." The millionaire watched her retrieve her card and walk toward the exit, still calm, still composed, still unbothered by the assumptions others made about her. The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving him alone with his thoughts. He stared at the quiet machine, its screen now blank, and exhaled deeply. He had laughed at her. And yet she had walked out wealthier in every possible way, financially, emotionally, and in character. For the first time in a very long while, the millionaire realized something profound. Real wealth didn't always announce itself. Sometimes it arrived silently, humbly, almost invisibly, until the moment it chose to shine. And when it did, even the proudest could be left speechless. When the screen finally lit up, the glow washed over the young woman's calm face and reflected in the millionaire's eyes. He hadn't expected much, maybe a few $100, maybe a modest paycheck sitting untouched. But as each digit slowly appeared on the screen, his expression shifted from polite amusement to disbelief, and then to something even more intense, utter shock. He leaned forward instinctively, as though drawn in by an invisible force. At first, he thought the machine had made an error. It wouldn't be the first time a bank kiosk malfunctioned. Numbers that large didn't just belong to quiet, unassuming people like her, at least, not in his world. Yet the screen was clear, stable, and unmistakably correct. Her balance wasn't small. It wasn't modest. It wasn't even comfortably high. It was enormous. A sum large enough to silence even the most experienced investor. The young woman, still standing with the same gentle composure she'd had moments earlier, didn't react dramatically. She wasn't surprised, wasn't excited, and wasn't even pleased. She looked at the number with the familiarity of someone who saw it every day. As though it wasn't a fortune, it was simply her reality. The millionaire, on the other hand, felt the floor shift beneath him. His throat tightened. He blinked rapidly, as if the number might shrink if he looked away for even a second. But it didn't. The digits stayed, stubborn, undeniable, and powerful. He tried to speak, but nothing came out but a confused breath. His chest rose and fell with the uneasy rhythm of a man who had just discovered something that challenged everything he believed about wealth, success, and appearances. That's your account. He finally managed to whisper, his voice stripped of its earlier confidence. She glanced at him, offering a small, courteous smile. Yes, she said softly. Just an update. I check it once in a while. Her calmness stunned him even more than the number had. People with even a fraction of that amount usually lived loudly. Luxury cars, designer lifestyles, social media boasting, constant validation. Yet here she stood, simple clothes, simple demeanor, no trace of ego or spectacle. The wealth didn't define her presence. Her presence defined her wealth. How? He stopped himself. Asking how she gained that fortune was rude. Asking why someone like her had it felt even worse. He swallowed his curiosity, but it burned inside him like a flame hungry for answers. She didn't seem offended by his confusion. In fact, she seemed used to it. Most people react the same way, she said gently, retrieving her card from the machine. He straightened his posture, but the shock had shaken even his practiced poise. This wasn't the kind of news that passed through the mind casually. It lingered. It demanded reflection. Forgive me, he said, voice low but sincere. I didn't expect that. I may have been quick to judge. She nodded with quiet understanding. It's human nature, she replied. We judge based on what we see. But what we see isn't always the whole story. The words hit him harder than he expected. He had spent decades building a reputation, cultivating an appearance of wealth, surrounding himself with symbols of success. He wore his money like armor. Yet here was someone who held more wealth than he'd ever imagined, someone who didn't need the armor at all. Her strength came from a place far deeper than image. Do you ever worry? He asked suddenly, unable to stop himself. Carrying that much, quietly. She paused, thinking carefully. I worry more about how people treat others, she said. People often look down on someone until they learn what's in their account. That's the part that bothers me. Her honesty washed over him like cold water. In that moment, he realized she wasn't just wealthy. She was grounded, wise, and painfully aware of how people behaved around money. He, on the other hand, felt exposed. Before seeing her balance, he had laughed at her simplicity, her politeness, her quiet request. He had assumed she belonged to a lower world, one beneath his status. But the truth was the opposite. Her silence held more dignity than his laughter. Her humility held more value than his assumptions. She slipped her card into her purse and gave him a respectful nod. "Have a good day," she said kindly. He watched her walk away, each step steady, modest, unhurried. She wasn't rushing to buy something expensive. She wasn't retreating with fear or pride. She was simply living her life, a life that didn't need validation, applause, or attention. As the door closed behind her, the millionaire remained frozen, still staring at the blank screen that had moments ago revealed a truth he wasn't prepared for. He felt smaller, not in wealth, but in character. For the first time in a long while, he questioned everything he thought he knew about success. Maybe wealth wasn't in the noise, the display, the boasting. Maybe true richness was quiet, steady, and carried with grace. The screen had lit up with her balance. But the moment had illuminated something far more valuable. The difference between having money and being defined by it. And the millionaire, still silent and speechless, finally understood which one mattered more.